Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, thank you so much for stopping by. And as always, if you are a recurring viewer or a subscriber, thank you so much for your continued support of my channel. I really appreciate you all being here. As of the filming of this video, it is Sunday, April 9th, so it is time for another weekend reading update. And last week was a fairly good reading week for me. I feel really good with what I was able to get covered. I finished 3 books, and then I have 2 books that are currently being worked through. So I thought I would start off with what I read last week. And the first book that I want to mention is Beowulf, the Penguin Classics edition translated by Michael Alexander. This is for week 2 of a Beowulf read-along that I'm doing through April with Steve Donahue and David Wiley. And I just posted a video about this earlier today, so I'm not going to talk about it in here because I have a different video for it. And I'll leave a link down below if you're curious to my thoughts on Michael Alexander's translation as opposed to J.R.R. Tolkien's translation. But this was a whole lot of fun. Then the other 2 books that I finished last week, the book that I started the week out with was The Collected Tales of Nikolai Gogol, translated by Richard Pevere and Larissa Volkansky. I talked about this in last week's weekend reading update, saying I was getting ready to start it. So I read this last week. All but 3 of these stories were my first time reading. The ones that I had read before, I had not read in this translation, however, so it was interesting to be able to read those from a new perspective. And I actually got along a lot better with the translators here than I thought I would. They sort of redeemed themselves in my eyes after somewhat of a troublesome experience in their translation of Dr. Zhivago. But this was much better than I was expecting. And I was curious to see if reading a different translation would change my favorite Gogol stories status, but it has not. The Overcoat is still by far my favorite of Gogol stories, with a close second being The Portrait, and then third being The Carriage. So I was curious to see if that hierarchy would be shifted at all with this different translation, but it was not. The Overcoat is still by far my favorite of Gogol's works. Then I moved on to Yevgeny Onegin by Alexander Pushkin, and this is a translation by Stanley Mitchell, put out by Penguin Classics. This was a first-time read for me, so I don't have a whole lot to say as far as the translation goes. I do want to read a couple other translations now after having finished it, but this was absolutely fantastic. It's a novel. It's a novel in verse. So you have your stanzas there. So it's actually a very quick read, just because there's not a whole lot of text on the page. And being a novel in verse, it has quite a lot of energy and snap to it. So once you get started, it really pulls you in. And this is the story of Yevgeny Onegin, who is a young man who is thoroughly put out with city life in St. Petersburg. And after he inherits a country estate by a recently deceased relative, he decides to move out to the country. Then when he is there, he comes into contact with a neighbor who is an artist, who through this artist, he's a poet rather, and through this poet, he gets introduced to a circle of friends. He meets this poet's fiance and his fiance's sister. I believe it's sister. Yes, I want to make sure that I got the story correct. He meets his neighbor's fiance and his fiance's sister, and sort of a love triangle comes out of that meeting. And then there is some rifts that form between these members in this new friend group. Some tragedy strikes. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I don't want to spoil anything. I'm thinking about doing a dedicated video for this one. But this was a lot of fun. I read it over the span of about 3 days. I probably could have read it a little faster, but I was trying to really slow myself down to really enjoy the verse, because it was in verse. I didn't want to just sort of roll through it, because as opposed to prose, having a novel in verse, it does add another level of depth to the story, just because it just feels different from a novel in prose. So that was a whole lot of fun, and I really enjoyed this reading, and I'm definitely going to try to find a couple other translations of Yevgeny Onegin to give a try to. Then moving on to the two books that I'm currently reading, the first of which is for Classics and Company, and it's the April it's the April to May pick, and that is Borges, The Complete Fictions, and this is translated by Andrew Hurley, and this is put out by Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition. So, like I said, we're reading this for Classics and Company. I almost said for Penguin Classics. We're reading this for Classics and Company in April. This is the complete works of Borges, and I'm doing about 2 to 3 short stories a day. I'm on page right on page 100. And I have to say, so far, I have still not really found my footing with Borges. I really had no knowledge going into this, what his writing was like, so I was a clean slate as far as expectations went. And so far, the main feeling that I have is one of slight disorientation and confusion when reading his stories. I really haven't found my footing yet, my grounding yet. A lot of times I'm having to reread a story to try to grasp at any thread of meaning that I might be able to hold on to. A lot of it's going over my head, so I'm wondering if that comes down to translation, if it comes down to just me as a reader, or if I haven't read sort of some of his influences to understand exactly what he is driving at. So what my hope is that as I continue reading, because I'm certainly going to keep on reading, I'm hoping that will sort of force myself to adapt to his structures and the way that he presents the story, and then it will sort of all start clicking for me. At the moment, I don't want to say I'm not enjoying it, because that's not quite the right way of putting it, but I definitely do have a bit of a feeling of reading something and coming away confused and not quite sure what I just read, and having trouble sort of even really understanding what is trying to be conveyed to me as a reader, which isn't a great feeling as a reader. So I'm hoping that if I sort of push on with this and keep on going, that will maybe fade away, and I will sort of, I'll start to understand what's being presented and in what way it's being presented. And because there's definitely a lot of sort of ethereal writing, very modernist in a way. So I'm curious to see sort of if I begin to adapt to this writing as the reading goes along. That's certainly what I'm hoping for. Then my next currently reading book that I have is Marc Ferro's Nicholas II, The Last of the Tsars. And I started this one last night. This was sent to me incredibly kindly by Steve Donahue from the Brattle Bookshop in Boston. And this has been really great. So I just started it, just on page 35 or 40, something like that. So at the very beginning, we're still being set up with Nicholas II, sort of his life as Tsarevich before he became Tsar. He just got back from his travel to Japan, where an assassination attempt was made on his life, laying the groundwork for the dissolution of the Russian people to the Tsar, sort of the Tsar and the Russian royal family losing their essentially godlike status in the eyes of the Russian populace, sort of how that then laid groundwork for the future revolutions. So some really interesting stuff. I'm definitely enjoying it. I'm hoping to do a dedicated review for this one when I finish it, just because this is something that's right up my alley, and it's been going really great. And I haven't read anything by Marc Ferro yet, so this is my first time, but I'm really getting along well with his writing, which has been fantastic. So that is my second currently reading. So both this Nicholas II biography and Borges will be moving into next week, and then I will also be reading Burton Raffles' translation of Beowulf starting on either Thursday or Friday for week 3 of our Beowulf read-along. So if you want to continue tracking along with Steve Donahue, David Wiley, and myself for the month of April with Beowulf, the next translation will be Burton Raffle. Thank you so much for watching. That is it for this week's reading update. I really appreciate you all being here. Feel free to leave a comment down below if you would like, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now, and happy reading.